Joseph from San Francisco, given that the gospel is ultimately the believer's greatest hope for social change, how would you advise Bible-believing Christians to approach engaging with politics and civic responsibilities, especially in today's increasingly secular context? Again, I appreciate this, Joseph. This has been one of my major concerns all of my life and ministry. My very first book was entitled Culture Shift, and it was an attempt in this increasingly secular age to remind Christians of our responsibility in thinking of through the culture. So let me just tell you, I believe that the Bible's presentation of these issues, and then sequentially, the Christian reflection on these questions, it all takes us back to the Scriptures and to the Christian conversation about these things, which I believe reached its quintessential moment in this sense in Augustine, in the 4th and 5th centuries, but in particular, Augustine's work, The City of God. Because what he was explicating there is exactly what Jesus was talking about in the first and second commandment, what it means to love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and mind, and then the second is likened to it, to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's Jesus setting out love of God and then love of neighbor. You know, notice love of God is first. It's the clearest priority. And then there's love of neighbor, which is, Jesus has made very clear in the Gospels, is an all-encompassing responsibility. There's no one who is not our neighbor. And furthermore, love of neighbor is derivative of love of God, because we love our neighbor not because they are our neighbor. We love our neighbor because we commonly have been made by God in His image, and thus God has established our neighborly responsibility. But Augustine famously talked about the two cities, the city of God and the city of man. Paul makes reference to this when he says we're citizens of a heavenly kingdom. He also describes himself as a citizen of Rome. So there's an earthly citizenship and a heavenly citizenship. And I think Augustine rightly spoke of the two cities, the city of God and the city of man, each driven by its own love. In the city of God, the love of God. In the city of man, the love of man. And you know what? Humanitarianism won't get anyone to heaven, but you'd rather live in a community marked by humanitarianism than murderous hatred. And so here's just a reality. God has revealed His attributes even in nature in such a way that we should seek for God's own attributes and His will for human beings to be as visible as possible. And this is a part of the Christian responsibility. We have a responsibility. Here's the question Augustine was asking. It's a great question. If our ultimate citizenship is in the city of God, why are we here in the city of man? It can't be an accident. God must have a purpose for us being in the city of man. And I believe there is a purpose, and that is, first of all, the preaching of the gospel. That's the first reason. We have been given time. We don't know how much time for the preaching of the gospel, and for the fulfillment of everything Christ has commanded, just as we see in the Great Commission. And that would mean the establishment and the nurturing of healthy biblical gospel churches. We don't know how much time we have for that. But there is also a responsibility to the larger society. And there's no escaping this, by the way. And so even the people who say, I don't believe in a social responsibility of Christians, they actually do. Just take the issue of abortion. If you believe that the law ought rightly to protect the unborn, that is a justice issue. You're speaking of justice for the unborn. You're also talking about God's attributes and character being rightly represented in the law. We don't want to be a part of a society that denies just life, gift to the unborn, or for that matter, to anyone else vulnerable. So in other words, it's very inconsistent for people to say, I don't believe the church should be involved in political issues, and then to say, yes, of course I believe abortion's wrong, and that should be reflected in the law. The reality is, the command of God is all comprehensive. None of us is going to be faithful to thinking through how we are to engage every issue in every context at every time. This is where we need the church. This is where we desperately need the church to think and pray and preach through these issues. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. The first issue is the priority of the gospel, the saving message of Jesus. And then the question is, what kind of people does the gospel produce? What kind of responsibility comes with that? And, I would have to say, looking at the question, Joseph, engaging with politics and civic responsibility is going to have to be an ongoing conversation of Christians as to what is right and what is wrong, what is most faithful, what is least faithful, because it's going to change by context. It changed in Germany between 1920 and 1930 and 1940. It wasn't the same question in those 3 decades. You go from the collapse of the German Empire to the establishment of the Weimar Republic, which was democratic of a sort, and then you go to fascism and Hitler. So asking, how do we engage politics? It's a different question in those different contexts. In the United States, you mentioned secularization. Yes, that's creating a different context as well. And so we need Christians to think through these things fast and faithfully and together. And by fast, I don't mean just immediately. I mean to be about thinking long-term, ongoingly about these questions.